He is a longtime member of the journalism profession, if you will, a best-selling author from the New York Times back in the day, and now the senior investigative reporter for ESPN and the host and executive producer of a new ESPN docuseries, Backstory. Don Van Natta back here on the show. How are you, Don?
I'm doing great, Rich. Great to see you.
Let's talk about the backstory here, where it's you get a deep dive. You choose a subject. The first one was Serena and Naomi Osaka from last year, correct? At
Yes.
the U.S. Open. Where did this concept come from, Don?
Came from John Dahl, who was the co-creator of the 30 for 30 series.
Right.
And it was his idea to create a docuseries where we would go back into sports history and find scandals, stories, controversies where there's room to run. There's some reporting we can do, bring some fresh perspectives. And I was thrilled when he called me last year and asked if I'd be interested in hosting it and doing the reporting. And we've got 5 episodes in the first season. And the first premiere episode was Serena versus the umpire that aired last month. Carlos Ramos from Portugal and the clash between Serena Williams and Carlos Ramos as she sought her 24th Grand Slam title, tying Margaret Court's record.
Yeah, that was over a year ago now. And I just remember the phone lines on this show during an NFL season, they light for no story that's not NFL.
Right.
Except for that one, because it was just a whole big to-do as to whose fault it was. Was it Serena for going over the edge, over the line? Why was the umpire doing what he did in the first place? What did you learn that you might not have known with the backstory?
That's exactly what we sought out to find out. Who was most at fault for a match that ended in tears? And it was the ugliest finish in Grand Slam history by far. Was it mostly Serena's fault, Carlos Ramos, the umpire's fault, or something else? We determined, Rich, that just about everybody shared the fault. There was equal blame to go around. Serena certainly could have handled the situation better. She's never to this day acknowledged that she received coaching from Patrick Mouratoglou, her coach, during the match, which she was called for. That set off that whole chain of events.
Yeah, because who gets called for that sort of thing?
It almost is never called for, but she insisted that she never gets coaching. And we, Zapruder film-like, went back and actually showed a split screen where Mouratoglou makes the signal for her to move up closer to the baseline. And at that moment, she's looking right at him. And then Mouratoglou nods, like, okay, signal received. And so I asked Mouratoglou about it. I went to Wimbledon, and he gives a very interesting, squirrely answer about that, almost winking as he sort of admits that Serena most likely saw the coaching signal, although he doesn't quite say it.
So what fault does the umpire admit?
Well, the fault of the umpire, Carlos Ramos is a by-the-book stickler for the rules, gold badge umpire with a terrific reputation, but he let the match get out of control. And so we interviewed Chrissy Everett, Pam Shriver, a lot of people in tennis who said there could have been a soft warning, perhaps at least for the coaching violation.
Right.
And then the third code violation, which cost Serena a game as the match was spinning out of control, was for verbal abuse. And there was some thought that Ramos should have swallowed his whistle, let it go. So, you know, when a chair umpire does his job, Rich, he's invisible. And everybody knew Carlos Ramos's name for days after that.
So what other stories are you taking a backstory view of here, Don?
So the next episode, which will debut on November 3rd on ESPN, is the banning of Shoeless Joe Jackson. We're going to go back in history 100 years. We just did a story a year ago for our premiere.
Right.
Now we're going to go a century back to the Black Sox scandal, the banning of Shoeless Joe, what exactly was going on there, the legacy of Shoeless Joe, and then draw a through line from Shoeless Joe to Pete Rose, who, of course, was banned from baseball 30 years ago for betting on the Cincinnati Reds and lying about it for 15 years. And then we're going to look at legalized gambling today in Major League Baseball, the embrace of legalized gambling by Commissioner Manfred and the owners. And is there some hypocrisy there as you're still holding up these villains, Shoeless Joe from 100 years ago and Pete Rose? And we're excited about the episode. Interviewed Pete Rose at the Mandalay Bay a few weeks ago.
Was he at a table when
he
you
was
were?
Not he was not gambling.
Okay. He was not.
He was not. He signs baseballs and books.
No, I know.
And yeah,
sure.
and, you know, that's
you can
his,
find
that's
him
his
there
revenue.
pretty much.
That's right.
So what type of Pete Rose did you find when you sat
I found
down?
a really surprising one. I'm really anxious for the audience to see it. I mean, he almost ripped the microphone off at one point. I don't want to give too much away. He was very mad at me early on, but then you see a very different Pete Rose. I think he saw it as a chance for him to make his closing argument, to be in the Hall of Fame. And I think viewers are going to be surprised by the Rose that we found.
Okay. But you got to give me some. I mean, how did you piss him off? Like,
I just kept pressing him on 1989 and the fact that he lied for 15 years about gambling. on the Cincinnati Reds, betting on baseball, kept denying it until he had that book in 2004. And he thought I was going to ask a question or two, and I kept pressing him, almost like a prosecutor. And
does he not know who you are and what you're about, Don?
I don't know if he did his homework on me. Well, you know,
he didn't Google Don Van Natta. He didn't Google.
Rich, you know, I don't know if he actually. First of all, he wasn't going to do the interview initially.
Right.
I had to go out there and sort of schmooze him. That'll be part of the episode.
See, no, I always thought if Pete Rose had done what Mickey Mantle did, and by that I mean go on a tour of, hey, I had a problem, and I'm apologizing for it, and I was a bad father for it, and I'm warning everybody, don't be like me. If Pete had done that, just remove alcoholism and inserted gambling.
Yes.
If he had done that in 1990, 1991, despite the fact that the individual who banned him for life, as we all know, died of a heart attack in Bart Giamatti.
Right.
I think he'd be in the Baseball Hall of Fame right now.
I think you're probably right. And if he had gone on that contrition tour, and, you know, when he was banned from baseball, Bart Giamatti told him, you need to reconfigure your life. And reconfiguring your life is stop gambling. Pete thinks because he stopped betting with illegal bookmakers and only would bet in the casinos of Las Vegas legally, that was a reconfiguring. But, you know, he lied at his most recent meeting with Commissioner Manfred in 2015 when he tried to get reinstated and taken off the ineligible list again. He lied even to Manfred about whether he was still betting legally on sports. And I believe that cost him an opportunity then. So we go into all of that, and we really show the legacies of Shoeless Joe and Pete Rose, how they're linked, and whether they'll ever be forgiven by the powers that be in baseball.
And, you know, just one last on Rose here. I mean, I want to give voice to the fans who are perhaps listening or watching us right now, Don, and saying, what does it matter what PR it is? And what does it matter if he's gambling legally like everybody else can that Major League Baseball is now coming around on? He still raked all those hits. I mean, and that's why he should be in the Hall of Fame. Or why can't the Hall of Fame, it's a museum, tell the story of Pete Rose and put a plaque in there with his name on it?
Those are the questions we're going to raise. That's a great question. Rich, there's certainly a hypocrisy now.
Right.
Major League Baseball's putting a lot of chips in the middle of the table on legalized gambling, hoping it'll turbocharge the game's popularity. And so at the same time, you're still holding up Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe as these villains. We're going to get into all those issues in the episode.
When is that backstory episode?
November 3rd on ESPN it premieres, and it'll be on all through November on ESPN and on all the platforms.
Make a note of that. And by the way, 8 Men Out is one of my favorite underrated sports movies.
I love that sports movie too. And I interviewed John Sayles just a couple weeks ago in New York, the writer and director who plays Ring Lardner.
That's right.
You know,
with Studs Terkel in there as well.
Studs Terkel as the other journalist, and Sayles was great, and so that'll be part of the episode.
So how real is 8 Men Out? Is it real? Because it kind of exonerates Shoeless Joe Jackson.
It completely exonerates Shoeless Joe, makes him very sympathetic of a character. Though interestingly, Sayles still thinks he was complicit somewhat in the fix. But there's all sorts of inaccuracies in 8 Men Out, unfortunately. There were some liberties taken. The book that it's based on is riddled with errors. And again, we get into some of that in backstory. Yeah, there's a lot of myths that surround it.
I don't want to have it ruined. It's such a good movie.
It's a great movie.
John Cusack and John Mahoney and
D.B. Sweeney.
Oh, yeah. Well, he plays Shoeless Joe in the movie.
Yeah.
I do love that
Charlie
movie.
Sheen. It's fantastic.
That's right, Charlie Sheen.
Yeah.
Charlie Sheen, Don Van Natta here on the Rich Eisen Show. What's the NFL story, do you think, going on right now, 2019?
It's the collective bargaining agreement. It's the desire of the NFL owners, Rich, to put this behind them so they can do the broadcast deals and the streaming deals. And they've made some progress from what I understand it, but not nearly enough. I mean, the sticking points obviously are the revenue split, which the owners love.
Players not so much.
The players not so much. Players would like it to get closer to 50-50. That's a stumbling block point now. The other big one is the number of games. The owners want 18 regular season games. Players only want 16. There may be some give there. We may see 17. I'm hearing
17 games?
Which is the oddest number, right? How do you even figure that out?
Well, I mean, you already have 17 weeks, but there still needs to be a bye week.
There needs to be a bye week. So then it would be an 18-game season, presumably, right? And how do you do the split with 9 home games versus 8 away games, right, with 17? But I only heard that last weekend from a single source, so I want to be really careful with it.
Sure.
But there's a lot of, those are the two major points and stumbling blocks, but that's the big story going on right now. Remember, the NFL owners wanted this wrapped up before the season began. That has not happened.
Well, I think part of the reason why is for many reasons, but the NFL 100 season is very important to a lot of people in 345 Park Avenue.
For sure.
And what better way to celebrate the kickoff of that season than by telling the fans, guess what? Labor peace for a very, very long time. Enjoy NFL 100. So perhaps that might have had something to do with it. But you said something, streaming rights. I mean, how does this all play? Because it's now the 21st century, obviously. And
of course, if there is a collective bargaining agreement, or I should say when there is one, because there is optimism there will be one, then that will, Roger Goodell and the powers that be at 345 Park Avenue will turn their attention to the broadcast rights. And when I say streaming rights, there's all these new players, including DAZN, run by John Skipper, my former boss, that are all going to be in play. That, the more suitors you have at the table, the higher the price tag will be. Just makes sense. And, the NFL's already had relationships with Amazon, with Twitter, testing the waters, Yahoo.
Well, I'm mandated to point out the three letters that's behind me at this desk right here in AT&T.
That's right.
So, and with Sunday Ticket, et cetera. So how do you see it all playing out? Do you see like a Thursday night or a Sunday night or a Monday night package literally on somebody's app? Is that what you see?
It's possible. There are some owners and executives that I've talked to that think that the NFL should be that ambitious and that pioneering to do something like that.
Right.
At the very least, the threat of it is going to run up the costs for the networks, for NBC, CBS, and ESPN, which of course now has ABC in the mix because ESPN wants a Super Bowl.
They do.
Badly, they do. Yeah, for ABC.
No kidding.
There's been reports about it. Yeah, that's very much something that's on the wish list.
So a Super Bowl wouldn't be on ESPN on ABC? It would
be on ABC.
Well, it would be on ABC.
But ESPN,
probably ESPN and
ESPN Deportes, ESPN2, the Ocho, everything, Rich.
The Ocho.
It'll be on everything.
It'll be on the Ocho. It will be on the dodgeball halftime.
That's right.
On the Ocho. The Ocho.
But one quick point, Jerry Jones said recently to CNBC that he feels that there will be a 50% premium in the broadcast deals. In part,
what does that mean for the layperson?
Well, for the layperson it's $1.9 billion a year that ESPN is paying the NFL. So you do the math, it's $3 billion roughly, or a little less than that Jerry Jones is expecting ESPN and ABC and the Walt Disney Company to pay. That's a huge premium.
Yeah, well, if you do the math, then 2 extra games, it's something that somebody who's being asked to pay a 50% premium might be easier to swallow. I don't know if there's you get more games.
But you can certainly see the incentive in Roger Goodell and the owners in wanting more regular season games.
Okay.
Right? If they're going for that much of an increase, then you could see why it's so important to them to try to get 18 regular season games. Although I don't think that's something CBA will ever go for.
So when I'm sitting here saying I don't want more games in the NFL, I'm pissing off my bosses at 345.
You might be a little bit, Rich. I'd be careful with that.
Let me write this down and amend. What about Don Van Natta here on the Rich Eisen Show? What role does sports gambling play in all this?
A big one. We've talked about it before. In fact, 2 years ago when I sat in the studio, the Supreme Court had not yet done the landmark decision that they did the following May that opened the floodgates, to states across the country. It has just changed everything. It has put dollar signs in the eyes of all of the major sports leagues, particularly baseball that we talked about, but the NFL as well. I think when Jerry Jones made that point to CNBC about the 50% increase, part of it was because of what he expects the turbocharging of ratings to occur because of legalized gambling.
So I see. Because again, this now dovetails into a lot. Because, I've heard that the amount of money that the NFL could perhaps reap in by getting wetting their beak a little bit, to use a certain movie phrase, pales in comparison to what a television network could pay them for one single rights package. And Musburger's been on this show from his VSiN studios saying no one in Vegas is going to let the NFL take a piece or something like that without,
That's about the integrity fee.
Pretty much. Yeah. The integrity fee. I think Musburger laughed out loud when I brought up the integrity fee. Like
I've heard
literally.
him on that. Yeah, he just says, "Look, what integrity? It's nonsense. You know, the integrity of these games is run by the bookmakers out there. They do a pretty good job of it and have done a really good job of it. Have we had any betting scandals that anybody knows of? So why do you need to pay it? However, there's other ways to do it. There's data that you can possibly sell.
Like
and there's been some leagues
like the SEC looks at it, not the Southeast Conference. I'm talking about like the same type of technology that's used to monitor stock.
That's right. Well,
market.
for official stats, for instance, if you want rights for official stats in the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, then you have to give a tiny piece of the action to one of the sports leagues. That's being openly discussed by the leagues right now.
All right, and before I let you go, Don Van Natta here on the Rich Eisen Show. It's been many a moon in New York City. You know this as well. The Eli Manning benching is, you know, while a jolt for the Giants, it's kind of sad. It just feels a little bit saddening to me. I don't know how it feels to you.
It does. And, you know, and to see Daniel Jones, it does feel sad about Eli, but even Daniel Jones, he's Eli 2.0, right? He's as boring as Eli, which maybe is a good thing.
Don, when we played, do we have that soundbite, Mike? Do you, the Daniel Jones soundbite from Wednesday? Just play it one more time here, because on Wednesday's show, I had Mike play it for a second time because it sounds so much like Eli. This was Daniel Jones when he met with the media on Wednesday.
Excited for the opportunity. You never really know when something like this is going to happen, and my job is to be ready and to continue to improve. And you don't know when something like this can happen. I can't control that. So, I understand the responsibility. I understand the challenge. I feel ready and certainly looking forward to the opportunity.
I mean, if that was a transcript, he could read dictated and read by Eli Manning.
It's true. And when I heard Eli at the locker room yesterday, Rich, talk about being benched, he said it with more enthusiasm than Daniel Jones talked about starting. I was like, Eli sounded more excited about, him being the backup quarterback of the New York Giants than Daniel Jones does.
Do you think it's going to work? I mean, I had Dave Brown in studio hour number 1. Do you think it's going to work?
I don't think so. I think there's going to be a long learning curve. Look, Daniel Jones looked great in preseason. The bottom line is Dave Gettleman just wants to be right as soon as possible. Yeah. So get Daniel Jones in right away. Gettleman wants to prove all those naysayers. Remember all the people, a lot of pundits at our network were laughing out loud when Daniel Jones got picked with the 6th overall pick.
I mean, it was ripped up and down.
It was stunning, and it got ripped up and down. So, hey, Gettleman's like, let's roll the dice. I want to be right now rather than later.
At DVN Jr. on Twitter, at D Van Natta with 2 T's J. Is that for Big J Journalist? Is that what that's for?
Well, you said that. I appreciate that, Rick. What a nice compliment. Oh, my God.
On Instagram, check out the new ESPN docuseries Backstory. November 3rd is when the Shoeless Joe Jackson / Pete Rose
ESPN.
version on ESPN. And check out the Triangle podcast with you as well. Thanks for coming on, sir.
Great to see you,
Don
Rich.
Van Natta here on The Rich Eisen Show. We'll wrap up this show and more on Friday's show in a moment.
For more of The Rich Eisen Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV for free on BR Live or download the Rich Eisen Show app.